Wallace Ford, and welcome to the Inclusion Show Weekend Edition. Remember, the Inclusion Show is the only show that includes you. And our guest, a very special guest, is Mr. Jeffrey Deskovic. And Mr. Deskovic has just this compelling personal narrative, as well as just the work that he's doing can just truly be described as the work of the just, trying to free the innocent. And with that, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show, Jeffrey Deskovic. So good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Our pleasure. Really. Let me begin in trying to introduce you, and I say trying to because it is such a compelling story that you have. In trying to learn about you, I've read this article that you wrote, and why don't we start there? Because the article goes like this. It says, Fernando Bermudez, Sammy Lecas, Jose Morales, Ruben Montalvo, Lazaro Burtz, Kareem Bellamy, Anthony Ortiz, Frank Sterling, Roy Brown, Dennis Halstead, John Kogut, Eric Gilson, Jonathan Fleming. Those are the names of 13 men that I personally knew and served time with who were either exonerated during my 16 years in prison or thereafter. And you go on to say that you served 16 years in prison from the ages of 17 to 32, wrongfully convicted of a murder and rape in New York, despite the fact that the DNA never matched. Now, as someone, I'm sure many of our viewers are just saying, well, how does this happen? For goodness sake, I mean, this is your personal story. Perhaps you can share with us just how do you even get in this kind of situation in the first place? And I hate to say what was it like, but people want to know how do you even survive such an experience?
Wow, Wallace, lots of questions built in one.
Yes.
All right. So my wrongful conviction was caused by a coerced false confession, prosecutorial misconduct, fraud by the medical examiner, and an inept public defender.
So you just got the perfect storm.
Got the perfect storm. Yes, has been called that way by many people. So let me kind of unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
All right. So I initially got on the police radar because some of the police claimed that I was overly upset at the victim having been murdered. And the other factor, which they said attracted them to me, was they said that that they interviewed many students from the school, and some of the kids told the police they might want to talk to me because I was quiet and to myself.
This is high school?
This is high school, yes. I'm a sophomore.
Which is notorious for people teenagers having opinions about other teenagers, and most of it is bogus anyway, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this game with me in which when they would interview me, like half the time they would talk to me as if I was a suspect, and the other half the time they would talk to me as if they needed help to solve the crime. They would say things like, look, the kids won't talk freely around us, they will around you. Let us know if you hear any rumors. Stop in from time to time. So eventually,
excuse me, where are we talking about here?
We're talking about Peekskill in Westchester County, New York.
Peekskill, New York, okay.
Yes. So eventually they got me to agree to take a polygraph test. Listen, we just got some new information in the file. We want to share it with you. You have to pass a polygraph first for us to be able to do that.
Okay, now this is without the advice of counsel or no representation at all?
No representation at all, and without parental knowledge.
And your parents didn't even know?
My parents did not even know.
Okay.
No. So they drove me to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County, about 40 minutes away. So now I'm not able to leave on my own. I'm dependent upon the police. There's 3 police officers there who I'm aware of, and then there's the polygraphist himself was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator who was pretending to be a civilian, so he never told me that he was a cop. I wasn't given anything to eat the entire time I was there. They played good cop, bad cop. They put me in a small room and attached the polygraph to me. He gave me countless cups of coffee before he got started, and of course the reason for that is that
it elevates your heart rate, right?
Yeah. Yes, so that's going to give them the polygraph test result that they want in the end. So then he begins a lot of scare tactics. And he invades my personal space. He raises his voice at me. He asks me the same questions over and over again, getting more and more ferocious as each hour passed by.
How many hours are we talking about?
7.
7 hours of interrogation.
Yes.
Okay.
Towards the end of the interrogation, a polygraphist says to me, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to confirm it." So when he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof, which was already quite high because of the length of time. That's when the officer was pretending to be my friend. He came in the room and he informed me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he'd been holding them off but couldn't do so indefinitely, that I had to help myself. Then he added that if I did as I wanted, not only would they stop what they were doing, but that I could go home afterwards. Being young, naive, frightened, 16, not thinking about the long term. I was in fear of my life and just thinking about the moment. I made up a story based on information which they had given me in the course of their interrogation.
So you really, just to cut in, so you really had a point that you pretty much would have said anything just to get out of there.
Absolutely.
And I imagine, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that happens to a lot of people.
Yes, it
these
does.
kinds of situations. Again, just so we're clear, this is without counsel.
Right.
Did your parents even know where you were at this point?
No, because this all happened on a school day. So they, as far as they knew, I was in school.
You were in class?
Yes.
I see. Okay, and so this is the justice system hard at work here, I guess, at this point. So you do this what sounds like a coerced confession here.
Yes.
You wind up going to trial.
Yes.
And you wind up getting convicted.
I did. I just want to add one half thing on the
Sure.
on the confession. Just at the end of the interrogation, I was on the floor in a fetal position. I was crying uncontrollably.
Okay.
Okay. And then also, this was not video recorded. It wasn't audio recorded. There's no signed statement. There's not even a statement that they wrote out that I refused to sign. It's all by way of just verbal testimony from the police officers.
Just hearsay from the police officers. So
Yes.
So at this point, just to kind of get an idea, because we're gonna take a break in a moment and come back. And what I want to talk about is, clearly with this confession, I assume this obviously led to this conviction, and you wind up in prison for 16 years.
Yes.
Okay, and just there's two questions, of course. One would be, and we'll do this at the break, after the break, just how do you get through something like this? And what was it that gave you the determination to try to get yourself exonerated in the first place? So why don't you hold that thought. This is the Inclusion Show Weekend Edition, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the Inclusion Show Weekend Edition. Our guest is Mr. Jeffrey Deskovic, a man who served 16 years in prison, was exonerated, and has spent the rest of his life since then working to free the innocent. But we're at this point, Jeffrey, we're talking about just how you got into this situation in the first place. Now, we talked about this confession, and now you were confessing to the murder of who's the victim that we're talking about here?
Yeah,
we should make sure that we bring that up.
Yeah, I confessed to a murder and rape of a victim who was a 15-year-old immigrant from Colombia who had really been in the country just for a year and a half, led a very sheltered life in which she never went outside, save accompanied by her older sister or her parents. Mm-hmm. And that kind of brings me into the next point. I mentioned prosecutorial misconduct. So the results of a DNA test came in from the FBI lab, pre-trial, showing that semen found in the victim didn't match.
Didn't match me. Didn't match you. Mm-hmm.
Right, which by everything right should have stopped the case right
there. Yeah.
Okay, but the prosecutor decides that he wants to try to win the case no matter what. So he solicits fraud on the part of the medical examiner. He got the medical examiner 6 months after doing the initial autopsy and coming up with his notes and findings. He suddenly, for the first time, claims that he found medical evidence to show that the victim, leading the life I just had said, had been sexually active, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to argue it didn't matter, the semen didn't come from me because she could have had consensual sex close in time proximity to the murder and rape. Taking it a step further, he also named another youth by name that he claimed had this encounter with the victim, yet he never did a DNA test result in order to prove that. He didn't call him as a witness to give verbal testimony. So basically, to wrongfully convict me, to wrap up, he was willing to trash the reputation of the victim in the course of doing that.
Okay, and I gather her family didn't have much to say about this at this point either. So we wind up with this trial, okay, mm-hmm. and you wind up being convicted. Okay, 17 years old, mm-hmm. and you're convicted, and you were sentenced to, what was the term that you were sentenced?
I was sentenced to 15 to life. 15 to life.
Okay, and I can't imagine as a 17-year-old that's just like forever. Okay, it's basically you're going to be in prison forever at that point when you hear this. So you wind up going to a New York State prison,
Yes, a men's maximum security
Men's
prison.
maximum security prison. Which one was it?
Elmira.
Elmira, okay, which is far away from anybody you know. Your family had to go through a much hardship, I'm sure, time and travel just to go visit you.
Yes.
You're 17 years old in prison, and again, the two things we wanted to talk about is how, where do you find, and you obviously did find the strength to overcome and survive what by all accounts, maximum security prisons are just a tough place for anybody to be. But for a 17-year-old, it's just daily warfare out there for you. And the other part is that you somehow tried to get yourself exonerated. There's people, and we'll talk about this, who know that they are innocent, but they don't do what you did, which was to actually prove your innocence against a really stacked deck, So tell us about that. How do you get through something like that?
All right. Well, firstly, yes, it was a long sentence, but in my mind, I wasn't doing that much time. I thought I was only serving a year or two until the next legal proceeding, which I was the next appeal. At which point I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent, and I naively thought that the system got more accurate and better through the appellate process.
As you go up the process.
Yes, yeah. In terms of how I got through, just on the human side of it, before we get to the legalese part of your question, it's well, firstly, you find things to throw yourself into mentally. So I read a lot of nonfiction books. I used to go to a law library to learn about the law. I would read cases of other people being exonerated, which served as inspiration to keep going. Sometimes I would cut out pictures of nature scenes and put it on the cell wall and kind of like travel there mentally. Mm-hmm. You fight as much an internal battle in terms of warding off feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, depression, thoughts of wanting to give up. Suicide certainly dawns on you. So it's as much an internal battle as it is externally versus the district attorney and to some extent the courts.
Because when I read about prison and I've spoken to other people who've been in prison, I mean it's typically important to affiliate with. You don't want to be alone in prison. So sometimes people they join the Nation of Islam, or some people they join the Aryan Brotherhood. It's just something to be a part of, so that you're not just alone out there. And I assume you didn't know anybody. You didn't know anybody there.
No, I did not.
Anything like that.
No.
So how do you just wind up not being the loner out there at this point?
After about being there for about 6 months, I converted to Islam, and I became a Muslim, and I practiced for about 15 and a half years.
I see. Well, that really
got me through and prevented me from committing suicide. I mean, there was also it helped keep away a lot of the riffraff. I mean, that wasn't my
predators.
Yes, that wasn't my intention, but it was definitely a side benefit. Although that's a double-edged sword, because I mean, at times, I was assaulted trying to defend other people who were assaulted, so their problems became mine. So
sure.
Just to be clear on that part of it. But
so then again, at some point the appeals run out.
Yes.
Okay, and so now you're there.
Yes.
You still got that 15 years to life. Now it's 13 years to life, or 12.
Well, by the time the appeals ran out, I had been in for about 11 years.
11 years.
Yes. So I knew
of appeals.
Of appeals. Yeah, I lost all 7 appeals, often on procedural technical grounds. One, the low light of which was when I lost after my petition arrived, because it was there 4 days too late.
4 days too late.
Because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information.
Okay, and that judge that it was going to go before is now Supreme Court Justice
Sonia Sotomayor.
So
yes.
Okay, so then when do you start trying to exonerate yourself?
Yes.
The appeals are gone. You've
Right.
exhausted your appeals, but you haven't given up.
No,
Okay.
absolutely not.
Okay. So what we want to talk about when we come back, Jeffrey, is that you didn't give up, and a lot of people must. I mean, this takes a tremendous. I can't imagine how much personal inner strength you had to draw upon to just keep going in the face of all of this. So we want to talk about just what got you into this process of trying to exonerate yourself, successfully exonerating yourself, and where that led you. This is the Inclusion Show, the weekend edition. I'm your host, Wallace Ford. We will be right back. Welcome back to the Inclusion Show, Weekend Edition. I'm your host, Wallace Ford, and our guest is Mr. Jeffrey Deskovic. And Jeffrey, we've been talking about this whole notion of exoneration of people who have been wrongfully convicted and wrongfully imprisoned, and you're living proof of just how that whole process works, and it's not a pleasant one. It's not a pleasant story. It's not a pleasant reflection on this country, but we were talking about some of the ways that people wind up wrongfully convicted in the first place, everything from prosecutorial misconduct to rogue police, and you mentioned junk science. And I just said, before we move on, it's just, it's of course not funny, but it's just bizarre that things like bite marks and tire tracks can wind up, which are not really scientific proof, get people convicted. But you had one more we were talking about, dog sense, really?
Yeah, again, it would be funny if it didn't have such detrimental circumstance, but basically in a nutshell, the idea is that the dog will be given an item left at a crime scene, he'll smell it, and then we're going to bring the dog to the suspect's apartment or present a piece of clothing from them, and if the dog recognizes the smell, he's going to bark. And the bark is the dog alerting the handler, and he's going to come into court now and say, hey, well, the dog recognized the smell, he barked.
My gosh.
And people have been convicted. He was at work like this. We'll put that in quotes too, for about 20 years in Texas and Florida, and a lot of murder cases.
Dog sense.
Dog scent testimony, yes.
And then when you combine the fact that you also have class issues and race issues in the criminal justice system, you've just got a toxic mix. You take junk science along with the predisposition to say that people of color, for example, they probably did the crime anyway. And you got it's modern day lynching, really, in a very serious and sad way. Your foundation. So what is it actually? You mentioned some of the things that some of your key mission statement kind of things. But what is it doing right now? What are some of the things that you guys are doing that you can tell our audience about, please?
Sure. We have 8 active cases, so we're trying to exonerate 8 people.
Are they all in New York?
No. There's also a case in New Jersey and Pennsylvania as well.
Okay.
And by the way, just to briefly digress, we did help free William Lopez, who had served 23 and a half years in prison in Brooklyn. Okay. Then we're also working to prevent wrongful convictions.
I remember hearing about the William Lopez case, pardon me, but because William Lopez was in prison for like 20-something years?
23 and a half years,
okay.
Yes.
And your foundation helped in the process of getting him exonerated?
Yes, and then we helped him reintegrate, and as you probably are aware, I mean, he only survived 1.5 years
and then
post release. Yes, he died.
That's just, no amount of money is ever going to rectify some situation like this. It's just stunning. It's just stunning. So you're working on 8 active cases right now.
But beyond that, the foundation we're actively seeking, to have changes in the law. So that means I educate the public, and I also educate lawmakers on the causes of wrongful convictions, even the systemic things, even other than what we've talked about, from coerced false confessions, misidentification, people convicted on snitch testimony, except the snitch doesn't have accurate information.
Well, I'm going to put on my lawyer's hat here for a moment, which I rarely wear these days, but what kind of laws could help address some of these concerns? I mean, laws I'm talking about.
Laws.
I understand process and procedure and training and all of that, but what would be some legal reforms that your foundation might suggest?
Well, in terms of preventing wrongful convictions caused by false confessions, videotaping interrogations from beginning to end, because that's been the cause in 25%. Allowing false confession expert testimonies that could provide an expert opinion as to what the circumstances are that could lead to a false confession.
So let me get it straight. So right now, if in a trial you want to have a false confession expert come to testify on behalf of a defendant,
it likely will not be allowed.
It will not be allowed.
Right. And then also we need to have better identification procedures, because that's been the cause of wrongful convictions in 75% of the cases. So here,
you're talking about eyewitness ID?
Yeah, eyewitness ID.
Which is
that's a leading cause of wrongful conviction.
It's a leading cause of wrong, and what's interesting, of course, is that while we see in TV and you hear people say, well, eyewitness testimony is really one of the most unreliable forms of evidence there is, isn't that right?
Yeah, exactly. Some of the factors that have led to misidentifications is poor lighting, length of viewing, if it's a stranger identification. Cross-racial identifications are particularly problematic. If there's a weapon used, that's another factor because the eyes focus on the weapon.
You're distracted like heck at that point, aren't you?
You absolutely are, sure. Then in terms of informant testimony, the reforms in the law would be having a law that says that nobody could be convicted on an informant without at least one other piece of external evidence, so a corroboration.
Corroboration.
And then also wearing of a wire, so these dubious jailhouse confessions where people seemingly freely talk about committing serious crimes to virtual strangers, we can be sure that these reforms actually, these confessions actually happen. Bad lawyering. So it's not unusual for a public defender to represent 100 or 120 people at the same time.
Well, that's a funding issue, though, isn't it?
That is a funding issue.
That's really a funding issue, and when budget cuts come around, nobody's really there to defend the defenders, if you will, right?
That's
now,
right.
let me ask this in the time we have left, because I want to make sure that we talk about this. You put like $1.5 million of your own money into this foundation to get it off the ground. No one would blame you if after you got your settlement and move forward from there, that you bought a villa on bought an island, heck, whatever, and just lived your life as best you want to do. I just want to say, just before we finish up there, I think that it's really great what you're doing. It's a testimony to your own strength of spirit. And for what it may mean to you, I just want to convey my appreciation of the work that you're doing at this point. And we're going to put your website up because we want to make sure that our viewers know how to contact you, and as importantly, know how to contribute to your foundation. And hopefully people will. And Jeffrey, I just want to wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you again. And now it's time for From the Heart. And the subject that we're going to talk about has to do with Cuba and the fact that President Obama has determined that finally, after over 50 years, the United States will resume diplomatic relations with Cuba. Now, there's the predictable opposition from the predictable usual suspects, which would be Los Cubanos in Miami and also in northern New Jersey in particular, the people who just want you to believe that before Castro that Cuba was this land of the free and the home of the brave, when in fact it was a place where people lived for decades upon decades of United States-supported dictatorial rule. And so now that you have a situation where finally common sense is taking place, there's some people that say, no, the United States should not be recognizing Cuba. 50,000 Americans died in Vietnam, and you can get on a plane tomorrow and go to Vietnam and spend as much time as you want there. The United States has many, many differences with Russia and with China, and there's no problem going there. It's clear that we're finally seeing with this president a rational strategy with respect to dealing with Cuba. And this has been the Inclusion Show, the weekend edition. I'm your host, Wallace Ford. Stay strong and be good.